Tiberius did not announce his departure from Rome. He left, and authority went with him. There was no return. Rome woke to routine. Senate met. Temples opened. Yet the center had moved. From the moment the emperor crossed the water to Capri, distance became policy and absence became command. Public ritual depended on presence. Faces, gestures, repetition. Tiberius removed himself from all of it. Accountability followed. No audience meant no correction. Orders arrived without explanation. Silence replaced ceremony. A clerk kept the books. He sharpened his stylus each morning and wrote as he always had. Dates. Allocations. Transfers. He no longer saw the man whose will he recorded. That did not stop the work. It made it easier. From the island, messages were brief and final. Decisions traveled faster than questions. Appeals ended before they began. Rome learned to obey a voice it could not see. Nothing collapsed. The city proved it could survive without contact, and that discovery hardened into habit. Withdrawal looked like restraint. It was not. It gathered power where scrutiny could not follow. Capri was quiet by design. Distance filtered witnesses. Only those summoned crossed the water, and crossing changed status. The clerk noted the summons with fewer words than before. No reasons were required. Authority had learned it could act without being watched. The island was called a refuge. That description ended the moment the boat touched shore. Return was no longer guaranteed. Selection for Capri appeared ceremonial. Names were read. Orders delivered calmly. The crossing itself felt ordinary. That was the deception. Once arrived, Rome no longer applied. Distance replaced law. Capri functioned as a closed system. Guards were quiet. Paths were controlled. Schedules were precise. No one wandered without reason. No one asked questions without risk. The island did not need walls. Water performed that role. Access to the emperor was described as honor. It was also exposure. Young attendants and servants were chosen carefully, often without explanation. Their duties were flexible by design. Uncertainty replaced instruction. Survival depended on reading signals rather than following orders. The first consequence was simple and cold. Those brought to Capri did not answer to Rome anymore. They answered only to proximity. A clerk recorded the transfers. His entries grew shorter. Names appeared without titles. Purpose was implied, never stated. The omission felt small. It mattered. Daily life continued with rehearsed calm. Meals were served, corridors cleaned. Silence filled the spaces between tasks. That silence trained obedience better than threat ever could. Isolation became the tool. Capri was distant enough to escape scrutiny and close enough to control completely. Messages moved outward. Bodies did not. The island was not where excess happened. It was where interruption ended. On Capri, law still existed. It could not be challenged. The rules were posted, repeated, and enforced without emphasis. Movement required permission. Speech required restraint. Access depended on favor. None of this felt unusual at first. Routine hid intent. One attendant failed to return after a routine summons. There was no explanation. No inquiry followed. He did not come back. The system absorbed the absence without pause. Duties shifted. Space closed around the loss. No record acknowledged concern. Removal was sufficient. Punishment did not need spectacle. It needed unpredictability. Rules were written broadly enough to include everything and precise enough to excuse nothing. Compliance depended on anticipation rather than obedience. Midway through, the meaning changed. These rules were not designed to restrain the emperor. They were designed to restrain everyone else. Survival depended on predicting moods, not following law. The clerk felt this before anyone spoke it aloud. He corrected an entry, then rewrote it entirely. The ink darkened where hesitation had been erased. Fear reached the page. Faith offered no shelter. Devotion became private and silent. Shared belief suggested alliance. Alliance invited attention. Attention invited removal. Time itself became disciplinary. Waiting replaced punishment. Silence replaced instruction. The longer one endured, the more careful one became. Resistance required coordination. Coordination required trust. Trust could not survive isolation. By the end, it was clear that what followed could only happen here. These rules protected quiet. Quiet protected power. Nothing else was required. Nothing spreads faster than rumor. Nothing is silenced faster than testimony. One dismissal proved that he did not return. The servant had followed routine. He had seen something out of place, nothing dramatic, nothing provable. By evening his station was reassigned. By morning his name was no longer spoken. No reason was offered, no disgrace attached. The absence was treated as efficiency. That was the signal. Those who remained adjusted immediately. Eyes lowered sooner. Steps slowed. Memory learned to edit itself. Knowledge became a liability, not because it was forbidden, but because it created obligation. Obligation attracted attention. Attention decided removal. Witnesses were not punished loudly. They were relocated, assigned elsewhere. Detached from sequence, a man who saw too much one day cleaned a different corridor the next. Another was transferred to an outer post where questions no longer formed. Each move reduced overlap. Each reduction narrowed what anyone could know. The system did not depend on secrecy. It depended on fragmentation. Midway through, the realization settled. No single person ever saw enough to object. Each task was small. Each observation partial. Survival required incomplete understanding. To see fully was to fail the system. The clerk felt this change in his work. He stopped writing what he observed and began recording what he was told. Second-hand notes replaced presents. Reports arrived without detail. He copied them exactly. Accuracy mattered more than truth. Order continued without interruption. Meals arrived on time. Floors were washed. Schedules repeated. Cruelty did not disrupt routine. It hid within it. Faith offered no protection. Confession required language. Language required memory. Memory created witnesses. Silence became devotion by necessity. Even private prayer learned restraint. The longer the system endured, the less it needed enforcement. Fear became internal. People removed themselves from danger by refusing to know. Ignorance was no longer weakness. It was discipline. By the end, silence no longer felt imposed. It felt natural. The palace functioned smoothly this way. Absence blended into order. The dismissed servant became a caution without a story. Nothing announced this transformation. It completed itself quietly. What followed did not require witnesses. It required only the certainty that none would remain. What occurred on Capri was not chaos. It was organized. Once selected, refusal did not exist. Those summoned to the inner spaces understood this immediately. Selection arrived without explanation and required no consent. A name was spoken. A path opened. From that moment, ownership replaced choice. The system did not argue. It assumed compliance as its starting condition. Nothing here relied on impulse. Preparation followed rhythm. Bodies were cleaned, instructed, and positioned with care that suggested purpose rather than desire. Silence surrounded each step. Questions were unnecessary. The process had been refined long before any single person entered it. What made the practices dangerous was not excess, but repetition. The same movements. The same expectations. The same expectations. The same quiet removal afterward. Harm did not erupt. It accumulated. Each cycle left less behind to resist the next. The language used to describe these encounters was carefully empty. Duties. Service. Attendance. Words drained meaning from experience until only function remained. Those involved learned to think of themselves in the same narrow terms. This was not enforced with violence, it was enforced with routine. Midway through, the truth settled with weight. Survival itself was part of the cruelty. Endurance extended exposure, compliance prolonged usefulness. Living longer meant remaining available. Those who adapted were kept. Those who faltered were replaced. Neither outcome offered relief. Time became the measure of damage. The system rewarded stability, not well-being. It preserved what endured longest, regardless of cost. The recurring record keeper appears here only indirectly. A list of supplies requested at regular intervals: oils, linens, water. The requests never varied. No explanation followed them. Their consistency was the message. No single act defined the danger. The danger lived in scheduling, in the certainty that tomorrow would repeat today, in the knowledge that silence protected the pattern more effectively than threat. Faith did not interrupt this order. Belief was allowed only if it remained private. Prayer could not interfere with function. Meaning was stripped away because meaning might resist repetition. Nothing here exploded. Nothing broke suddenly. The tightening came from knowing that the system did not need escalation. It had already reached efficiency. When a person was removed afterward, it was done without ceremony. Another took the place. The rhythm continued unchanged. Memory was unnecessary. Replacement was easier. By the end, it was clear that the practices could not be named because naming creates edges. Edges invite judgment. Judgment disrupts routine. This system did not require cruelty to feel dangerous. It required only silence, repetition, and time. Some lived. That was not mercy. Survival ended nothing. Those who left Capri did not return as they had arrived. There was no restoration, no clearing of record. Survival reassigned them permanently. New posts, new names, new distances from anything that resembled choice. What they endured followed them quietly, shaping where they could go and what they could say. The first consequence appeared quickly. Those released were never questioned in public. They were never celebrated. Their return carried conditions that did not need to be spoken. Silence was expected as payment for continued breath. At first, survival looked like proof of restraint. A story circulated carefully. The emperor punished only when necessary. Order was maintained. Those who lived appeared to confirm it. Their presence softened rumor without denying it. Daily life reinforced this illusion. Survivors performed duties with discipline. They spoke politely. They showed no visible injury. Observers learned the lesson intended. If compliance worked, harm was avoidable. The system appeared reasonable. Midway through, the meaning inverted. Survivors were not exceptions. They were instruments. Their continued existence validated everything that had happened. They proved that refusal was possible, that endurance was rewarded, that silence ensured safety. The system required them. Without survivors, rumor would sharpen. With them, doubt dissolved. Living witnesses erased those who did not live long enough to be seen again. The clerk encountered one such survivor decades later, not in person, but on the page. An archival correction replaced a harsher term with a gentler one. Removed became retired. Language performed mercy where none existed. The ink settled the matter. Gratitude was expected from those spared. Silence was rewarded with continued placement. Speaking would suggest ingratitude. Ingratitude invited scrutiny. Scrutiny reopened doors that survival had only closed temporarily. Life was no longer the opposite of harm. It was evidence that harm was acceptable. Endurance became testimony against the absent. The dead could not contradict the living. Those who survived learned to guard their faces. Memory was managed carefully. Even thought required restraint. Survival demanded participation in the lie that survival meant choice. The chapter closes without relief. Understanding settles where comfort should be. Survival did not undo the system. It completed it. Roman bureaucracy recorded everything that mattered to power. Suffering did not qualify. Lives ended on paper long before they ended in fact. The consequence appeared early and without drama. A name became a term, transferred, completed. No explanation followed. No appeal was possible. The record moved on. Capri produced no confessions, only documentation. Reports arrived in Rome trimmed of detail, dates were precise, outcomes were final, causes were unnecessary. The system did not need to lie, it only needed to choose what counted. A clerk reviewed the files years later and found nothing unusual. Each document followed procedure. Each decision carried approval. No single page revealed harm. Together, they erased it completely. This was not negligence, it was design. Roman administration valued continuity above truth. Records existed to preserve order, not experience. What could disrupt stability was reduced until it fit. Midway through the archive, the pattern clarified. People vanished in language first. Once described as reassigned, their absence became official. Once official, it required no further mention. Memory ended where classification began. The emperor was protected by this precision. Nothing connected him directly to consequence. Orders appeared as routine operations. Distance insulated responsibility. The paper absorbed what voices could not carry. The recurring anchor appears one final time here. A signature, consistent in form, identical across decades. The name does not change even as the context darkens. It certifies movement. It confirms completion. It never comments. That signature survived longer than most who passed beneath it. Later historians searched for contradiction. They found none. The records aligned too cleanly. That alignment was the warning. Absence repeated this precisely was not chance. The system did not forget. It decided. Cruelty here required no excess. It relied on reduction. When a person could be summarized in a word, nothing more was owed. The record became the final witness, and it refused to speak. By the end, the viewer understands that disappearance was not accidental. It was administered. Memory itself was regulated through ink, seals, and silence. Nothing needed to be destroyed. It was simply filed away. Capri still stands. Stone outlived testimony. Rooms remain where voices did not. Corridors persist without names attached. The consequence is final and quiet. Nothing left behind explains what happened, and that absence was intentional. Archaeology replaces confession. Walls show use, not meaning. Thresholds carry wear without memory. What endured was structure, not story. The island was never erased. It was repurposed. Space once restricted became ordinary. The system did not collapse. It withdrew and waited. Here, there are no records to correct. No margins to read closely. Absence itself becomes evidence. When nothing confesses, persistence speaks. The viewer is allowed to breathe here, but unease remains. Silence does not resolve, it lingers. Every stone confirms that power does not require acknowledgement to survive. What was built to control does not disappear when control ends. It simply loses witnesses. No room admits guilt. No passage offers clarity. The harm has no visible boundary. Only endurance. No victims are named aloud. The emperor is. That is the final consequence. Erasure complete. Structure intact. Tiberius remains fixed in memory through title and record. Those who moved through his system did not receive the same protection. Their absence became normal. Silence finished the work. Power began. This story offers no correction. It offers no verdict. Only alignment. The viewer is not asked to judge. Judgment belongs to systems that believed silence could replace responsibility. The viewer is asked to witness. Memory here is not comfort, it is obligation. What endured was not excess, but order, not confession, but procedure, not chaos, but discipline applied without appeal. If this history feels distant, that distance is part of its success. The system functioned because it removed feeling from record. What could not be documented was treated as if it did not exist. But something always remains, not in stone, not in ink, inattention. If silence was the final punishment, then remembering becomes the only refusal left. So one question remains, calm and unavoidable. Who carries responsibility for remembering when silence was the system itself?